Brexit-Irish border mystery. Ireland is a big problem for Brexit. Or is it?
Is there an issue with the border?
There's no issue with the border, and particularly...
And
particularly...
Hang on. People say there is no issue with the border, and
if there's a free
say
trade
it's a
deal,
devastating potential crisis.
If there's a free trade deal, what's the issue? What's the issue? There is no issue. You know, this issue of the Irish border really has been used very much by particularly Monsieur Barnier to try and push Britain back into a hole.
Well, because we don't have a single market.
Already we have on that border, come on, we've got a different currency, different VAT rates, different tax rates, different corporation tax rates.
And there's limits on freedom of movement, and there need to be checks on the border.
Well, no, but Ireland's not in the Schengen zone, and we've had a common travel area with Ireland for nearly 100 years. There's no issue here. If we don't have a free trade deal, there is tariff over that border. I would accept that.
Northern Ireland is part of the island of Ireland, but also part of the UK. As an atheist who became aware of the Troubles after it was resolved, it seems weird to me to have this one part of the country that has Catholics and Protestants so divided, and for there to be no MPs from there who reside in the Labour Party or the Conservatives. But what's even weirder is that there's still Sinn Fein there who don't take their seats in Parliament.
And it's very important to say that we don't believe that any deal between the DUP here and the English Tories will be good for the people here.
Nevertheless, the Troubles were clearly a bloody and terrible time that nobody wants to return to. So therefore Brexit has to maintain the people of the entirety of Ireland and Northern Ireland the right to self-government and the right to the freedom and peace of the land, which means no hard border.
If we reach the point where the restoration of devolution is possible, but the stumbling block is Arlene Foster being First Minister, will you stand aside from that post?
Well, look, we're in negotiations, and that's what it's all about at the moment, and we certainly can't, to borrow a phrase from the Prime Minister, engage in a running commentary. But Gerry Adams in particular and Sinn Féin in general have talked about who they want to see, or who they don't want to see as First Minister in terms of the DUP.
But right now, the devolved Irish government won't even sit together in Stormont, all over a heating scheme, meaning Sinn Féin walked out of Stormont. It makes you wonder, if that can cause such a row, then what will Brexit do?
What was there in the legal text is around creating a border down the Irish Sea, and of course that's not something we in Northern Ireland could allow from a constitutional point of view, obviously, but also in terms of economics it would be catastrophic to have that border down the Irish Sea. 56% of our goods from Northern Ireland go to Great Britain, so it's incredibly important that that border does not exist and that we continue to have...
And you want that in the text?
We do, we want that in the text.
It's worth mentioning the DUP are also in coalition with the Tories, meaning any Brexit deal will automatically be more biased towards those DUP constituencies.
We had what I believe was a very frank, a very productive and a very positive meeting. We have, I believe, a meeting of minds in respect of the necessity to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all of its dimensions. We have a meeting of minds on the necessity to avoid a hard border and everything that entails on the island of Ireland. We also have a shared understanding of the necessity to protect the single market and the concerns of the other member states. We shared with Monsieur Barnier our frustration with Theresa May and with the British government, who, far from advancing their position, have in fact rowed back to propositions that were rejected last August. Really fantastical propositions around some unspecified technological solution to the Irish border. That is unworkable, that is unacceptable. This is a moment where the island of Ireland, Irish people north and south, need the solidarity of our fellow Europeans. We very much hope that that will be forthcoming. And the ball is now in Mrs May's court. The ball is now in the court of the British who say they don't like what they have seen, they don't like the solution advanced by Europe. If they don't like that, we would like to know what is their solution. What is their plan A or plan B?
So we get it. No hard border, everything the same as it was before Brexit. But in Salzburg, the EU wanted to either keep Northern Ireland in the customs union and single market and create a border in the Irish Sea, or introduce checks at the border, meaning a return to more territorial times in Ireland and less freedom to trade across that border.
Anything which fails to respect the referendum or which effectively divides our country in two would be a bad deal. And I have always said, no deal is better than a bad deal.
The problem is that Northern Ireland wants to be part of the UK, but the UK wants to be out of the customs union and single market. That means no freedom of movement, otherwise anybody or anything could get into the country. But the UK doesn't want a hard border in Northern Ireland, which means having freedom of movement in that area. It's incredibly complex.
The option C, in essence, is almost a sort of reserve parachute, the sort of the final backstop guarantee, really, for all elements of this. But nobody sees that as the most desirable outcome. Everybody sees the free trade agreement, option A, as the most desirable outcome, and I think that's true across the board.
There are some Brexiteers who think checks away from the border, or a smart border where technology does it instead of people, is the solution.
The blue tunnel, that there would be our ability, as we had during the Troubles, to have people inspected, that it's not a border that everyone has to go through every day. But of course, for security reasons during the Troubles, we kept a very close eye on the border to try and stop gun running and things like that. It's not inconsistent to have a border that people can pass through, but you're keeping an eye on.
But the real issue here is that the threat of a war on the island and separation of the UK is stopping the UK from getting a free trade deal that benefits the UK. Neither the EU nor the UK want a hard border in Northern Ireland, but the EU says we can't have Northern Ireland out if we want to end free movement.
Any backsliding on the commitments made so far would create a risk to further progress in Brexit negotiations. This applies also to the question of avoiding a hard border. I heard very critical comments by Prime Minister May and others about the way the Irish border issue was presented in the draft withdrawal agreement. We know today that the UK government rejects a customs and regulatory border down the Irish Sea, the EU single market, and the customs union. While we must respect this position, we also expect the UK to propose a specific and realistic solution to avoid a hard border. As long as the UK doesn't present such a solution, it is very difficult to imagine substantive progress in Brexit negotiations. If in London someone assumes that the negotiations will deal with other issues first, before moving to the Irish issue, my response would be Ireland first. We must recognize the democratic decision taken by Britain to leave the EU in 2016. Just as we must recognize the democratic decision made on the island of Ireland in 1998, with all its consequences.
The EU is punishing us for leaving and frightening the government into staying. It seems to me the government is buying it and threatening UK citizens with a no deal. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.